The sun had barely climbed above the dusty highway when the sound of metal clanging echoed across the empty parking lot of an old roadside diner. A group of rough-looking bikers stood around a powerful black motorcycle that refused to start. Their leather jackets carried the famous winged skull patch of the Hells Angels, and their faces looked frustrated, tired, and a little embarrassed. The engine had died in the middle of nowhere, and despite years of riding and fixing their own machines, none of them could figure out what was wrong. The heat of the day was rising fast, and tension was beginning to grow between them. It was the kind of moment when pride and frustration mixed together like fuel and fire. But none of them noticed the small figure standing quietly near the edge of the parking lot. He was just a boy, maybe 11 years old, thin and dusty, with messy brown hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in weeks. His clothes were worn out and slightly too big for him, and the soles of his sneakers were nearly gone. In his hands he held a small rusted wrench, turning it slowly as he watched the bikers argue over the broken machine. His name was Rowan, and the world had already taught him more about survival than most adults ever had to learn. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who believes in hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel, Only Kindness. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can completely change a life. The bikers had been stuck there for nearly an hour. The leader of the group, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Granger Holt, wiped grease from his hands onto a rag and shook his head in frustration. Granger was known among the riders as a tough man who rarely smiled and never asked for help. His thick gray beard and scarred knuckles made him look intimidating even when he wasn't trying to be. But even he had to admit defeat when it came to the stubborn engine that refused to roar back to life. One of the younger riders kicked the tire in anger. Another leaned against the diner wall, sipping a soda and muttering about calling a tow truck. But Granger hated the idea of needing rescue. These bikes were their pride, their freedom, their identity. And then the quiet voice of the boy broke through the noise. Rowan stepped a little closer, holding his tiny wrench like it was something valuable. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, but there was a strange confidence hidden beneath the nervousness. He said he thought he knew what was wrong with the bike. The bikers turned to look at him, surprised and slightly amused. To them he looked like a kid who hadn't eaten properly in days, certainly not someone who could diagnose a powerful custom motorcycle. But Rowan didn't back away. He had spent countless nights hiding behind garages, near repair shops, and beside scrap yards where mechanics worked late into the night. While other children his age were asleep in warm beds, Rowan had watched, listened, and memorized every sound an engine could make. Machines were easier to understand than people. Engines never lied. Granger folded his arms and studied the boy carefully. Something about the kid's serious expression made him pause before laughing the idea away. Rowan looked down at the ground for a moment before speaking again. His voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the wind passing through the empty highway. He said he could fix the bike. But then he asked a question that froze every biker where they stood. If he fixed their bike, would they keep him? The parking lot went completely silent. The question hung in the air heavier than the summer heat. None of the bikers expected something like that. They had seen hitchhikers, drifters, and people asking for money before. But this was different. This boy wasn't asking for coins or food. He was asking for a place to belong. Granger looked at the kid again, but this time he noticed the things he had missed before. The hollow look in Rowan's eyes. The way he kept shifting his weight like someone used to running if danger appeared. The small bruises on his arms that told stories no child should carry. Life had not been kind to Rowan. Months earlier he had been living in a broken apartment with a mother who worked night shifts trying to survive. But sickness had taken her suddenly, leaving Rowan alone in a world that moved too fast to notice a child falling through the cracks. The system that was supposed to protect him felt cold and temporary. Shelters came and went. Some places were worse than the streets. Eventually Rowan chose the streets because at least there he could control where he slept. But hunger and loneliness had become his constant companions. Granger rubbed his beard thoughtfully. The other bikers looked uncomfortable. They were used to being feared, not trusted by a homeless child asking for a future. Finally Granger stepped aside and pointed at the motorcycle. He told Rowan that if the kid really believed he could fix it, he could try. Rowan knelt beside the machine like it was something sacred. His small fingers moved carefully along the engine as if he were listening to it breathe. He loosened a panel, checked a cable, then tapped the side of the carburetor gently with the wrench. The bikers watched in silence. Minutes passed. Then Rowan crawled halfway under the bike and adjusted a loose fuel line that none of the men had noticed earlier. He tightened it carefully and wiped his hands on his worn jeans. He stood up slowly and looked at Granger. Then he nodded. Granger climbed onto the motorcycle, still skeptical but curious. He turned the key and pressed the ignition. For a moment there was nothing. Then suddenly the engine exploded into life with a powerful roar that echoed across the highway. Every biker stared in disbelief. The machine that had refused to cooperate for over an hour was now running perfectly. A few of the riders laughed loudly, slapping each other's shoulders in amazement. One of them whistled and shook his head. But Rowan didn't celebrate. Instead he simply stood there quietly, waiting. Granger turned off the engine and slowly climbed off the bike. He walked toward the boy with heavy steps, his boots crunching against the gravel. Rowan's heart was beating so hard he could almost hear it. Because fixing the bike had never been the real challenge. The real question was whether anyone in the world was willing to keep him. Granger crouched down so he could look Rowan in the eyes. The tough biker studied the boy's face carefully, searching for something honest. And what he saw there surprised him. He didn't see pity. He didn't see manipulation. He saw hope. A fragile, desperate hope that this moment might finally change everything. Granger stood up slowly and looked at the other riders. They exchanged silent glances. These men had spent years riding together through storms, deserts, and long lonely highways. They were brothers in a way the world rarely understood. And somehow this skinny homeless kid had just become part of their story. Granger finally spoke. He said Rowan could ride with them for a while. Not forever, but long enough to see what happened. Rowan's eyes widened, and for the first time that day a small smile appeared on his face. It wasn't a big smile. Just a tiny crack in the wall he had built around his heart. But it was enough. That afternoon the group left the diner together, engines rumbling like thunder as they rode down the open highway. Rowan sat safely behind one of the riders, holding on tightly as the wind rushed past him. For the first time in months he wasn't walking alone. Days turned into weeks. Rowan proved again and again that he had a natural talent for machines. He fixed loose chains, repaired small engine problems, and even helped rebuild an old motorcycle that had been sitting in a garage for years. But more importantly, the bikers slowly began to see him as something more than a temporary passenger. He became their helper, then their mechanic, then something like family. Granger, the man who once barely spoke more than a few words at a time, began teaching Rowan everything he knew about engines, responsibility, and loyalty. The rough biker who once looked like the scariest man on the road slowly revealed a quiet kindness hidden beneath years of scars. Rowan learned that families didn't always look traditional. Sometimes they looked like a group of leather-jacketed riders who refused to abandon someone smaller than them. Months later, on another bright morning beside another dusty highway, Rowan stood in front of the same black motorcycle he had once repaired. But this time he wasn't a homeless kid asking to stay. He was the one fixing the bikes before every ride. Granger walked over and placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder. He told the boy that every rider in their group had once needed a second chance at something. And maybe Rowan had given them one too. Because helping him had reminded them who they truly were. Before this story ends, if it touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who believes kindness can still change lives. And here is a special request before we finish. Write the word, kindness, in the comments if you believe even one small act of compassion can completely change someone's future. Rowan looked out at the endless road stretching across the horizon, the same road that once felt cold and lonely. But now it looked different. Now it looked like possibility. Because sometimes a broken motorcycle is more than just a machine that needs fixing. Sometimes it's the moment when a lost child finally finds a place to belong. And sometimes the people the world fears the most are the very ones capable of the greatest kindness.